I'm going to talk about what is called the Biomechanical Dystonia approach. And this was a website that was run by a friend, Marcello, back around 2017 and 18. And then he pulled the site down, I think in late 18 or early 19. A lot of people, even to this day, I think there's a Facebook group that kind of carries on what Marcello was teaching, and he'd come up with a protocol that many people were doing. And I think he was one of the most brilliant minds in this game and someone I've learned a lot from. And we've stayed in touch over the years a bit. He lives in Spain and his story is really interesting. So he was a very healthy guy, and then a dentist some years ago drilled some of his cusps flat. And he was, I think, in his 40s, and he was, running and doing all kinds of things. And then within a very short amount of time, he had cervical dystonia. So he had a neurological disease, a very serious one. I think it was very devastating on him, on his life, his family, his career. And I know he used to talk about that in various groups, and he was trying to figure out what to do, and he was scrambling. And he was seeing a lot of dentists, and he was a smart kind of engineering sort of person. So he was also studying a lot of dentistry concepts himself, but he was not an actual dentist himself. So me and him met, I think, in early 15. I was one of the first outside Italy to start Starecta, and I think he was not long after me. So I think he started Starecta in early 15. And so we met each other, I think, on the group, and then started communicating directly through Facebook messaging and got to know each other and kind of stayed in touch quite a bit over the next few years, from 15 up until about 19. So in 19, Marcello, I think he considered that he was done. He had gotten rid of his cervical dystonia. He was back to a normal life, and he decided to shut down his website and just kind of exit this whole TMJ realm and focus on other parts of his life, which I think, I have complete respect for. And, especially having been where he was and just how hard it had impacted him and his life. But I'm going to talk a little bit about his protocol and where we agreed and where we disagreed. And one thing I want to say and make very clear about Marcello is I think he was a brilliant, he crossed engineering and dentistry. And he knew enough dentistry from studying it and being the dentist and having a mind for it that he would engage in these debates on Facebook groups with pretty well-known dentists and more than hold his own, right? Like usually the dentists on these groups, especially at that time, they just kind of spout out a bunch of theory and try to make you sound like you're wrong and you don't know anything if you're not a dentist, right? And Marcello could basically take that and thrash them with it because he could show how they're wrong and how he actually knew the theory better than they did. And I think that gained him a lot of respect. And for that reason, I also had a lot of respect for his ideas and the fact that he was a humble, smart guy who was just contributing a lot to the community. When we were communicating I would say for 15 and 16, we were doing Starecta, and then we were doing our own thing in 16. I think in late 17 is when we really started communicating a lot more frequently, and at least a few times a week. And he was coming up with his protocol based on the experiments he'd been doing for the last couple of years. And I had been doing ALF for about the last 2 years. And so his protocol, I had kind of helped convince him try ALF, which he did. And then he found that to be a very key unlock in his own progress. And that became part of his protocol. And so he started documenting this whole protocol. And for a while, we were even going to kind of create a business together and teach this stuff online. But then I think his plans changed because there was some kind of legal incident or something. So what is his protocol? I'm not going to do a great job of teaching his protocol. And I have a bunch of materials from back in the day when we were creating a course together. He believed in the ALF and using it to remove cranial torsions. The ALF is like a light wire appliance, usually on the upper arch, and you can use it to put some light expansion. But he would start off with keeping it very loose and using that to encourage you to keep the tongue on the roof of your mouth. And then he believed in a lingual bite, so he would register 2 different positions, like jaw kind of back and jaw forward, sort of, and there would be a bit of a ramp between the two. His view was that these ramps had a key neurological effect, and so this Gerber lingual occlusion was part of how, this was some of the theory that I think that Gerber lingualized occlusion comes from probably the 70s or something. But he had done a lot of research there, and he had used this as part of his thinking as to why he thought a lingual bite was important. And for him, a lingual bite meant that you had 4 different jaw positions. So you had an E, an O, and U. U is kind of protrusion. He thought that a healthy jaw and mouth would have all of these 4 positions supported by the jaw and the teeth, by the shape of the teeth, how the cusps come together. And that when you moved your skull around, like if you moved it forward, you should be moving your jaw into protrusion. And if you move it back, you should move your jaw back. And therefore, the jaw kind of supports the movements of the head on the neck. And so this was something that he had gone pretty deep on. That's a very high level of his theory. If you want to go deeper on his theory, I think there's better sources for doing that than me. So a few things where we agree. I give complete credit for referring to the skull as a balloon and inflating and deflating. This is something Marcello came up with around that time of 17 and 18, and I just really love the analogy that the skull essentially like inflates when you're getting healthier and it deflates when you're getting worse. And the reason it deflates is like the soft tissue is kind of coming in and the cranial bones are deranging. Also, he made this reference to your spine being like a bow and arrow, and that as you get healthier, you're pulling the bowstring back. And as you're getting worse, you're kind of like letting the bowstring loose. But that part of the recovery process included pulling this bowstring back and putting your spine back into place. So this is also an analogy that I really like and I generally agree with. Another thing that he was instrumental on was the curvature speed. This is another thing I gave complete credit to Marcello. I would have never known this, and he really drilled this into my head back in like 18 and 19, because his problems happened when a dentist essentially drilled his curvature flat, right? And that's what he would say, and this was in his posts, and he told me this story many, many times. And so his view was that in a natural, healthy skull and mouth, you should have this curvature, which is the line that kind of like goes here. So your upper and lower teeth make contact on this like occlusal plane, and this should not be a flat line, but rather it should be a curve up. And that this curve was necessary for some biomechanics that are key to how your whole skull and body work. And that if you made it flat, you'd have a lot of problems. You'd probably have a neurological disease like he did with cervical dystonia. So he's the one that kind of knew about the curvature, which is actually from dentistry. And I think the curvature has like been something that someone in the dental realm figured out back in the 50s or 60s. It's been around for a while, but he kind of figured out the importance to this whole TMJ thing that was happening, and he related it direct to his own experience. And then it clicked with me that, wow, like in 14, when this Vietnamese dentist drilled my teeth, he'd essentially flattened my curvature a fair bit. And that was what triggered kind of my nightmare that happened in mid-2014 when I had all kinds of health problems. So this curvature thing was a massive unlock. I don't think I would have figured this stuff out truly without that. I like to say, even though I disagree, and I'm about to talk about where I disagree with Marcello, like I cannot emphasize enough how much respect I have for him and how instrumental what he was figuring out was to my eventually figuring out how this thing works. Now where I differ from him, so the first thing, I don't think there's anything, like I don't think there's a lingualized bite. I can say that very confidently because I'm improving for 4 years and I essentially have open bite in the back that I support when I go to sleep. But I'm not supporting these lingualized bite at all. I was testing that for years back in 17, 18 when he was telling me about it. And I generally concluded that no, you don't need a lingualized bite. Beyond me, there's a number of people in my group that have all improved, and my son is on flat contact for years. So I'm pretty sure that he's just not right about that one. Second one is that he was very much into the ALF appliance. I'd used the ALF ever since 16. I thought it was a big thing, and then like I've experimented with it on and off for years. And I don't think you need an ALF. I don't think it does much for you. He was very much of the view that flat plane splints are very bad. And this is where, again, I disagree. So I think his view on this was that you needed this curvature and therefore a flat plane splint was bad. But what I figured out is like if you have vertical height, even if it's on a flat plane splint, it's going to contribute towards making your curvature better. So it's not that your splint needs to be shaped like a curvature in order for you to improve. If you just add some vertical height and keep it flat, your curvature will actually improve. I don't even consider it under question. Like I'm improving with flat plane splints, and I have other people in my group using flat plane splints and improving for a while. So like I just don't think he's right about that. And then the fourth one is the biggest one. And this is where I think when I talk about like what did I figure out versus where did I, lean on others or sit on top of their shoulders, and some of these other things I very much sat on top of my shoulders. But it is the soft tissue where I think it was my biggest unlock in figuring out how this works. And it's what allows you to continue going beyond where most people will plateau. and conclude some of the crazier things that I conclude, like this is the root cause of aging, beauty, disease, and all those other things. And that is because I figured out how this soft tissue works and how to do this faster approach, which I don't think he ever figured that out. And to this day, like, he probably doesn't really understand what I'm talking about. And I think this is where, when I'm done and I will, release all this information, it'll be really clear what I mean and why I think that this is so massive. To conclude, tons of respect for Marcello. Very smart guy. Contributed a ton to the community. A lot of people still follow what he says today, and he's helped a lot of people. I think like everything he said works. Like there's nothing he said that makes you worse. It's just like the only difference is the things where I'm different are things where, okay, like both things work. I think mine is a clearer way of how it works. You don't need to do the lingualized bite. You can just have a flat plane splint or a rubber mouth guard. You don't need the ALF to improve. So I just kind of simplify, in my view, I simplified things down to their core, what actually drives improvement. Having said that, I never had a severe neurological condition like him. So there might be certain elements to his story that are a bit different than mine. So I also want to set that as a caveat. Anyway, if Marcello ever watches this, big thank you to you, and thank you.